Sup y'all, and welcome to Cities and Urban Land Use, Part 1. In this video, we're going to ask this essential question: when, how, and why did cities form? You should recall that some places, more than others, possessed a superior environment for plant and animal domestication. Even though farming developed independently in many river valleys across the globe, not all fertile land is equally arable or farmable. For example, Mesopotamian agriculture proved to be more productive, with better plants and animals, than New Guinean agriculture. What emerged in extreme landscapes such as rainforests and arid regions were extensive subsistence agricultural techniques such as shifting cultivation and nomadic pastoralism, respectively. But what propelled mankind further into development was intensive subsistence agriculture, in which smaller plots of land are cultivated with a high degree of labor and resources. These fields would be tended daily, and they produced surplus food at a much greater rate. It was this innovation of intensification that brought about the dawn of urbanization. The most successful places where this style of farming occurred were along fertile river valleys where annual flooding restored the soil fertility each year. Instead of people moving to find more arable land, as in shifting cultivation, the nutrients came to them. This allowed for more long-term permanent settlements and greater population densities. The most significant regions in which this occurred were the Nile River in northern Africa, the Indus River in modern-day Pakistan, the Yellow River or the Huanghe in China, along the Andes in modern-day Peru, and around Mesoamerica in modern-day Mexico. However, the greatest of all was the Fertile Crescent along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The first agricultural villages formed out of these permanent settlements. Most of these villages were largely egalitarian, where people shared resources in order to survive. Specialists emerged with skills in areas such as metalworking, engineering, and accounting. A secondary products revolution began perhaps around 4000 BCE. Domesticated animals were used increasingly for things other than meat, for example, milk, wool, and manure for fertilizer. Additionally, animals were used for riding and plowing, making villagers even more productive. Humans are social beings. We prefer to be in close proximity to each other as well as the goods we need for survival and entertainment. Because of these human tendencies, agglomeration occurs, or the clustering of people and businesses for mutual advantage. We seek out ways to make our lives easier, preferring to have as much accessibility to goods and services as we can afford. This fundamental principle is what caused villages to grow into cities. One of the most significant turning points in human history occurred starting around 3500 BCE. It was at this time the first civilizations emerged, which are advanced cultures characterized by social hierarchies, symbolic communication forms, and a separation from the natural environment. Urbanization was a prerequisite for a civilization to form, and we can establish three elements necessary for the formation of both. The first two have already been discussed. A society needs an agricultural surplus, as well as permanent settlements for sedentary living in order to grow and expand. The third element is social stratification, which is a hierarchy of power and class structure within a society. We already mentioned that most people were farmers. However, specialists were also able to develop. Additionally, a leadership class, or elite, would emerge to maintain control and organize their villages. And their power was often hereditary, passing their authority from generation to generation. Over time, urban areas became more distinct and populated. The buildings and homes were nucleated or concentrated close to the core areas or centers of towns and cities. These core areas are where governmental, industrial, commercial, and religious structures were agglomerated for efficiency. The rural areas, where most of the farming occurred, were outside of the city. They were more dispersed, and the population was less dense, with houses further apart. Many leaders protected themselves and the citizens by organizing the construction of walls around their cities. These walls often distinguished the boundary between urban, which was inside the walls, and rural, which was outside. The first urban revolution started around 3500 BCE on the supercontinent of Eurasia along the Fertile Crescent, aptly named the Cradle of Civilization. Villages grew in size and complexity to the point that cities and states materialized. The first urban hearth and civilization took hold between the Tigris and Euphrates in Mesopotamia, Greek for land between rivers. Developing soon after were the Egyptians along the Nile. Beginning around 3000 BCE, one of the oldest civilizations developed between the central coast of modern-day Peru and the Andes Mountains. Somewhat later, around 2600 BCE, a civilization sprung up adjacent to the Indus River Valley of modern-day Pakistan and South Asia. Around 2200 BCE, and along the Huanghe River Valley of East Asia, were the Chinese. The most recent of the first civilizations developed around 1200 BCE in Mesoamerica around the southern part of modern-day Mexico. The physical or site characteristics of the first urban hearths were usually along resource nodes where valuable natural resources were available. Their specific or absolute locations were sites of arable land near water and with relatively flat territory to expand. These sites were usually chosen for defensibility and were clearly influenced by, you guessed it, geography. Most were in the northern hemisphere and relatively close to the Tropic of Cancer. The lone exception was ancient Peru. However, it was still equidistant from the equator, close to the Tropic of Capricorn. The first urban hearths were usually in great situations, meaning they possessed favorable relative locations with respect to other places. The largest cities were often located along transport nodes or intersections of two or more lines of transportation, such as roads, rivers, and oceans.
Now we know.
And knowing is half the battle.
G.I. Joe!
Wait a minute. This isn't my world. Disappointment!